Hello, everyone. Welcome to Nails and Beauty Talk. I am your host, Asia the Bird. To have a very special guest with me today, he is an artist and a painter. Please welcome Paul Lewin. Hello, Paul, and welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, you're most welcome. So I want to go ahead and ask, where are you from and how'd you get started in art?
So I'm originally from Kingston, Jamaica.
Hmm.
That's where I was born. I moved to the US when I was about 4 years old.
Hmm.
And I've been doing art pretty much for as long as I can remember. Just as a kid, it was just part of my life. It was just something else that I did, like running or playing games. Just art was just a thing. And um, it was my escape,
Hmm.
it was my safe place. I remember, just sitting in class and
Hmm.
just dreaming of just getting home so that I could get back to that drawing that I was working on.
Right.
And I just, I did that throughout childhood and through my teenage years, and I just never stopped, basically.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really, really cool. So I know you talked about, you just said that you're from Jamaica, but you live in also in Miami. So how have you been able to incorporate traveling, especially your life journey through your artwork?
Yeah. Well, so like I was saying, I moved to the United States when I was 4 years old, and lived in New York for a year and then moved to Miami and pretty much lived in Miami for till I was about 30. And then I
Right.
moved to Oakland, California for a while. Most of my influence has been from the United States, growing up in the United States. Most of my early artwork was
Right.
influenced by growing up here. And then my later artwork has been influenced by my Caribbean culture,
Hmm.
through my family and just through, doing research. I did end up taking a trip back to Jamaica
Right.
um, around 2011, 2012.
Mhm.
And so yeah, it's sort of a mix of those influences.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, that's really, really amazing. But I definitely want to also get into your color palettes because I noticed that your color palettes are very, very consistent. So very complementary with a shot of analogous colors. So I thought that was very, very cool. So what made you decide to maintain that whole complementary color palette with like the orange and the blues?
Yeah, that's interesting. So for a long time, my work, I tried to throw in as many colors as possible into
Right.
each painting, just because
Yeah.
I just love colors, and that's what always, like really inspired me when it came to art, was just colors, artists who had those strong color palettes. So I was just throwing all kind of colors against the wall. And at a certain point, I just started looking into color theory and color harmony,
Hmm.
and learning about using fewer colors to have a more clear message
Hmm.
in your work. And so I started doing that about 8 years ago, and it
Right.
was a slow process of just focusing in each painting and learning from each painting
Mhm.
which colors really spoke to each other and which
Right.
colors really spoke to me.
Right.
Yeah, and sort of just honing in on those colors and narrowing it down until I eventually got to the color palette that I have now today. And it was just sort of a process of trial and error, and but listening to each painting, learning from each painting, taking small sections from each painting that I thought these colors work really well together, and just
Right.
expanding that into, you know in bigger paintings and
Hmm.
going from there. But that's basically how I came out with those colors. And also those specific colors, I think, also have to do with growing up here in Miami.
Right.
Yeah, Miami has a large Caribbean population. It's influenced a lot by the Caribbean, a lot of the Art
Hmm.
Deco of
Hmm.
Miami. It's a lot of pastel, uh,
Right.
you know, light blues, aquas, pinks. And in the Caribbean, there's definitely, you know, a lot of inspiration in Caribbean art of bright tropical colors.
Right.
And yeah, so I kind of grew up with that, and I believe that has to do with why I honed in on this specific color palette too.
Hmm. Yeah, that's really, really amazing. And I really like how you always incorporate Black women into your work. I think that's very, very interesting too. So how important is it and critical is to have Black representation within your work?
For me, it's really important.
Hmm.
It's critically important because for me growing up, I was inspired by science fiction,
Hmm.
fantasy art, sci-fi movies, and
Hmm.
you know the, all the stuff that I was reading and watching when I was growing up, there was
Hmm.
barely any representation
Right.
of people or characters that look like myself.
Hmm.
And so back in the 1950s and 60s when sci-fi was first coming out into television and movies,
Hmm.
there was virtually no representation of Black or brown people in
Hmm.
in those realms. And I personally think that science fiction is, it's sort of a collection of our hopes and dreams about the future,
Right.
technology, and things like that. And it, it kind of seemed like for a long time, and even still now, there were a lot of people, whether consciously or unconsciously,
Hmm.
didn't picture Black people in the future.
Exactly.
And so there was that question: Are there Black people in the future? And I think at a certain point we realized that if these stories were going to be told with us in it, we were going to have to tell them ourselves. We were going to
Right.
have to tell them in the way that we wanted them to be told, with our history, with our
Hmm.
culture, with our ancestors.
Right.
Um, yeah, and so for me, I feel like that's incredibly important for young Black and brown kids growing up now and in future generations to
Right.
see these characters, and to know that they belong in these stories, and
Hmm.
to be inspired by that. And I think a really great example of representation, is Nichelle Nichols,
Hmm.
who just passed away, the late great Nichelle Nichols, now late great.
Hmm.
She, so yeah, in the 60s, there was barely or virtually no representation on television with sci-fi or anything like that with
Right.
Black people. And she inspired a generation. She inspired a lot of young Black and brown kids to go
Hmm.
into STEM programs and into the space programs to be
Right.
astronauts and things like that. I think that is a clear example of how representation is incredibly important.
Hmm.
And so I value that in my work. And yeah, I think that's basically how I feel about it.
Hmm. Yeah, I totally agree that, Black representation is definitely important because, we live in critical times now. And what I like about like some of the movies now that are coming out, like, Black Panther, it was heavy on Black representation. And I like how it had a shot of futurism, like how it is within your work, like that Afro-futuristicness, but also has a shot of abstraction to it. So that's what I really like, seeing that it's grown so much in terms of art with having us like at the forefront.
Yeah, and specifically with Black Panther, what I think it showed is that Black movies, futuristic movies with Black characters can make money, because
Hmm.
that's always what the thing was. Hollywood had this idea that, oh, these types of movies aren't going to make the same kind of money as, Tom
Right.
Cruise as lead character, things like
Right.
that. And I think Black Panther broke that open. It
Hmm.
shattered it,
Hmm.
and so I think that going forward, there's going to be, it's opening up for, there's so many stories to be told, so
Right.
many new, refreshing stories that can come from all of our, you know different folklores and histories. And I think it's exciting. I think it's an exciting time going forward.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Now, what is your whole process behind creating like a body of work? Do you freestyle it? Do you plan it? Like, how do you usually work, in terms of your artwork?
Well, it's kind of a mix of freestyling and planning. I,
Hmm.
I I'll have a plan in mind,
Hmm.
and sometimes it comes from a few different areas. Sometimes it comes from meditation, daydreams.
Hmm.
Sometimes it's an image that I've had floating around in my head for months or years.
Hmm.
Sometimes, and basically what happens is, all of these images are kind of floating around, these ideas are floating around, and the one that I end up grabbing onto and actually painting is whichever idea or image or vision is making the most noise in my head. That's
Right.
the one I'll pull out and go ahead and choose to paint. And once I do that, once I choose an image, I will go straight to the canvas.
Right.
or now it's actually wood, but I'll just go
Hmm.
straight to painting it. I don't do pre-sketches. Um, that's just never been a part of my process. I just go straight to the canvas and start
Hmm.
painting. And what I try to do when I'm doing that is, as it's developing, I kind of, you know, sort of open a dialogue with the work where I'm listening to where the painting is kind of leading me. But
Right.
I have my idea of what I want it to look like, but I try not to be rigid about that. In
Right.
the process of a painting, for me, there's a lot of compromises and surprises,
Hmm.
and I try to just go with that flow, and eventually it all comes together, and the image comes out at the end.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, that's really, really amazing. Now, how long does it take you to do like a piece of artwork? Does it depend on the size? Like, how do you usually like how long does it take in terms of the artwork?
Most work that I do, so I these days I'm working mostly in 24 by 30
Oh, okay.
size panels, and that takes me about a week to a week and a half
Oh, okay.
for each one. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. So in terms of like working with clients, what has been your whole experience like working with clients or doing like installations and things like that?
Well, I don't have a lot of experience actually working with clients because I don't do commission work.
Okay.
Yeah, commissions is
Mhm.
it's something that's never been a part of my process.
Mhm.
It's just my work doesn't flow well in that way.
Right.
And so I've mostly, I feel lucky that the work that I do, the work that I love to do, that comes from myself, has been able to sustain me as an artist.
Mhm.
And I just enjoy that. I'm inspired by visions,
Right.
and the visions that I get, that's what inspires me, and I work best that way. I actually did one commission
Mhm.
a few years ago, and that was for an author, N.K. Jemisin,
Mhm.
sci-fi writer N.K. Jemisin. Yeah, and I did the cover for. She was doing a re-release on her book of short stories,
Mhm.
How Long Till Black Future Month,
Wow.
and yeah, and that was a great experience because the publishing company gave me full control
Mhm.
of what to do. There were no parameters, and so
Mhm.
a situation like that works out well when
Mhm.
when it's open like that. And then the actually the last time I worked with, I guess you could call it a client, was actually just last month. I did a
Mhm.
mural for the University of Santa Cruz.
Wow.
Yeah, yeah, and that was an incredible experience.
Very cool.
With the students there, it's sort of an interesting story. I'll
Mhm.
just give a little, quick backstory on it. It was so back in 2020, when the protests were happening,
Mhm.
George Floyd, and during the height of the pandemic. Um, at the University of Santa Cruz, in the science department, in one of the science buildings, there
Mhm.
were a lot of Black and brown students in these science programs, and
Right.
they were putting up Black Lives Matter signs
Mhm.
um, throughout this one building, and throughout the campus too. But in this one particular science building, the signs kept getting vandalized, and
Mhm.
people were ripping them down and vandalizing them. And so they ended up forming a mural committee because they wanted to put up a piece of art that represented Black culture that was
Right.
permanent. Yeah, and so that's how that came about. And when I spoke to the students and I heard their story, it really moved me, and it was something that was personal to me.
Right.
And they trusted my vision in what I
Right.
was going to come up with, and the fact that I didn't have a real strong mural history.
Mhm.
They trusted my vision, and so that's another situation of working with a client that works with my style. The fact that they trusted my vision, they saw my work, and they just wanted a piece of my work on their wall. And
Mhm.
those are the situations, I guess, when it comes to clients, where things work out best for me. But those are kind of extremely rare.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, right, exactly. Now, I definitely want to get into the business aspect of art because I know you have your own shop where you sell different pieces of merch with your artwork on it. So, what has been your whole experience of having, your artwork on different things, like just having an art business in general?
Yeah. So I never really thought for most of my life that art was going to be a full-time thing for me,
Mm,
or something that could bring in a substantial enough income to, survive off of. I
right.
approached art as just part of my life. Just it was my therapy, my meditation, my, just that thing is like breathing to me, basically. And
Hmm.
I worked since I was 19 years old till about 5 years ago. I worked I worked in grocery stores, health food stores,
Right.
and I just did art on the side. So for 25 years, I kept in trying to improve my art skills and just go deeper into my visions. And I was able to do that without having the pressure of having to sell my work, or having to, you know, have a certain style or stick with a certain style in order to sell my work. I could experiment with my work. And I think having that for 25 years, that sort of space to just experiment and just go deeper into whatever ideas I wanted, that helped my work develop, without any constraints. And eventually it got to the point where I was starting to see enough success that I felt that I wanted to go ahead and do it full time. And
Hmm.
that was about 5 years ago that I just, dove into it full time. And I've been doing it since then. Yeah, I mean, it's not for everybody.
Right.
There's a lot of ups and downs. And it's something that I've heard a lot of successful artists say, that I'm starting to learn myself, is that when you do get to that point that you're doing it full time, it's not a situation of where, okay, now I'm there, now I'm set, all right, we're just going to
Exactly.
kind of coast from here. You have to try to keep climbing. You have to try to keep, moving forward, because things are constantly changing in
Hmm.
this business. And you have to try to keep up. And it's a daily grind. It's a, you learn, you get better at certain things as you go along.
Mm, yeah, exactly. I do believe, and I can also agree as well. Like the art is like always changing. Like the industry is always changing with stuff like technology is
Yeah.
getting like better and better and better. You know what I mean? So it is something that you have to do your best to keep up and see what's going on and be in the know. And I definitely want to also get into pricing. So what is your whole take in terms of pricing, and what advice could you give for artists, like new coming artists, about how to price their work?
Well, I think a good place to start with pricing your work is trying to find other artists that are doing the similar type of work to what you're doing,
Mhm.
similar in genre of type of work that you're working on, and see what they're pricing it at,
Right.
and kind of go from there. That's basically how I did it. And you'll get a feel for, what sells and what not, what prices,
Mhm.
because it also depends on your audience. You have to know your audience, and what price range your audience usually purchases at. And a lot of that comes with trial and error. You'll price things at a certain point, you'll see that these things sell quickly or slowly, and you just kind of work it out from there. A lot of artists use specific formulas,
Right.
in their paintings, like by square foot,
Mm.
or by time, things like that. And I never really experimented in those areas. It's possible,
Mhm.
that works for a lot of artists, but I
Mhm.
just ended up kind of figuring it out by just trial and error, and doing it that way. That's how it worked out for me. And I know that that's how it worked out for a lot of artists that I
Mhm.
follow.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Everybody who prices different, like charged by like the hour, how you said per square foot and stuff. It just really depends. And I think that understanding your worth and your value is very, very important. You don't want to undercharge with what
That's
you.
it. Yeah, that's incredibly important too. Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah. So that's something that I think people have to understand, especially, the economy, because I want to definitely get into that too. So, what do you think about the US economy and how it's affecting artists possibly?
Yeah, so it's interesting because I honestly haven't been around a lot of artists since the start of the pandemic.
Mm,
With all the shows and everything that shut down in the first year, the second year, things are starting to come back open now. But in the middle of everything last year, I ended up moving from Oakland back here to Miami.
Hmm.
And I haven't really made the same connections here in Miami, coming back to Miami and plugging back into the art scene here. But
Right.
what I do know for myself personally is that this year, around the beginning of summer, when inflation was it really was, kind of exploded
Right.
uh, earlier this year, and I noticed for myself personally that sales kind of slowed down a
Hmm.
bit. And I would think that that would be similar for a lot of artists and a lot of projects across the country at this point, that people are kind of holding back a little bit on funding things and on investing in art, things like that,
Hmm.
until we get a better idea of how long this is going to last or where this is going to go.
Hmm.
But just for me personally, I've definitely seen an impact on my business from
Hmm.
it.
Yeah, right, exactly. But I definitely want to also get into like art mediums. So what are some like mediums, like whether it's like paint or anything like that you use for your work?
So I have really just stuck to one thing for the past 27 years that I've been painting. It's just been acrylic on canvas.
Hmm.
Um, but actually last year, about a year ago, I switched to acrylic on wood panels.
Hmm.
I'd never painted on wood before, and I was working with a friend, and we were doing this sort of collaboration. He does woodwork, and we were doing these cutout wood paintings.
Hmm.
And it was the first time that I'd ever painted on wood, and I really liked the way it felt. I liked the surface and the smoothness of wood.
Hmm.
And so since then, for the past year, it's been acrylic on wood. But that's the main medium that I work in, is now it's just acrylic on wood.
Oh, cool, cool. Do you use like the golden acrylic paints? Like what type of acrylic paint, like brand do you use?
I use golden. Yeah. Yeah. I started out using basics, and then I went to Liquitex, and
Mm.
then I ended up using golden, and golden has worked out the best for me for the type of
Mhm.
work that I do and the color, the vibrancy of the colors that I use.
Mhm. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, golden, you're gonna get those rich, rich, rich colors. Like it's very, very
Yeah.
pigmented.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So that's really, really cool. But I definitely want to also get into like NFTs really quickly. I don't know if you know much about NFTs. Have you ever thought about getting into NFTs at all? Or what's your take on NFTs possibly?
Yeah. I was when everything was starting to first happen with NFTs. I think it was last year, maybe it was the year
Mhm.
before too. But for me, I was really getting to know about it last year.
Mhm.
And at first, I was into it. I was sort of looking into how to get it done, because it seemed like a really great idea for artists, and it might still be. I'm just not sure. Around that
Mhm.
time that I was getting into it, I was hearing a lot of debate back and forth about
Mhm.
the negative side of it, the positive side of it, things like that. And
Right.
I felt like every article I read said the opposite of every other article that I read. I was just seeing so much stuff coming from both sides, and seeing people arguing online,
Mhm.
with both sides. And I personally felt like I just didn't have enough information
Mhm.
to make a decision, whether or not to go in that direction. Because I've heard some good things about crypto, I've heard some bad things about crypto.
Mhm.
Um, and I guess there's also the realization I didn't, have the inspiration enough to do more research into it. And
Right.
so I personally, at this moment, don't feel like I have enough information to, you know, do it. And,
Mhm.
I have some friends that have done it, and, I support them. And, I've seen this, I've heard of the success that artists that have had with it, but
Right.
I've never seen that personally. I have friends who are artists that have done it, and they say, yeah, it's worked out here and there, but they never really saw the success that we're hearing about on the internet and social media, things like that. But yeah, that's kind of where I'm at with it. It's not something that I feel very strongly about for my work right now.
Hmm. Yeah, like I feel the same way. Like I don't feel ready as of yet to jump in it just yet because I don't know a lot about like NFTs and stuff like that. Especially like, they have like the concept of Web3, the metaverse is like a 3D virtual reality world type of thing. So yeah, so even with myself, I don't feel equipped to to jump
Yeah.
to that space.
And so that's the thing too. I don't feel equipped with the knowledge of it because I've seen other artists who switch to NFTs and I've seen their audience just come back at them. And
Hmm.
then it's this debate on their pages and on their posts where they're going back and forth about, NFTs and, all the, so I'm not ready to have those debates. I'm not knowledge enough to have those debates. And
Yeah.
kind of from what I've seen, I feel like my audience has not responded well to NFTs also. That, and you kind of sometimes gauge it that way. It's
Right.
not everything that's just, you know, will my audience accept this or will they won't? You want to, do
Right.
stuff that comes from the heart, but you kind of get a feel for things. And yeah, it's just for me personally, it's just not a realm that I feel ready to go into.
Mm, yeah, right.
Yeah.
And especially that type of technology is pretty new. I think there's like a couple universities that's kind of talking about crypto and Bitcoin and stuff like that. I believe from my understanding. So, it's slowly getting big. There's some celebrities that are trying to get into NFTs and the metaverse and and especially more artists are jumping into it like every day. I'm definitely sure, and the thing is I interviewed this woman. She has her own NFT collection. She's an artist, and it's called Power of Women. And she talked about, artists are always jumping into the space, and it's hard to stand out. So if you do get into the NFT space, you got to really stand out. So that's the thing.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that's something that, that's really something you have to really understand, especially, I'm learning more as I go, over time of learning about NFTs. And I'm like, okay, the more I learn it, then I'll get into it, you know.
Yeah, and I think there's kind of this feeling of rushing that we have to jump on it now.
Hmm.
But I feel like if it's one of those things where you got to jump on it now, then it's not really something that's sustainable for the future.
Hmm.
If it's something that's real, that's solid, that's it's not, then it's not going to go away. It's going to be there in the future. If a lot of people are saying it's the future of selling art for artists, things like that. So if that's the case, then yeah, we don't have to jump on it right now. You can sort of take your time, see how it goes. Because the one thing I have seen that I know about crypto is that the crypto market is volatile.
Right.
It's constantly shooting up and down. It's unpredictable in a lot of
Hmm.
ways. And so yeah, I think it's going to take a bit more time before it's something that before it's really seen what it's going to be long term.
Right, exactly. But I also want to talk more about the other aspects of technology, especially with AI. There's like this one machine called Dolly where they'll take like a Google image, say if you want like a raccoon, like, driving a motorcycle, they'll do that painting of like a raccoon driving a motorcycle or something like that. Now we have like, we're starting to get self-driving cars and, stuff is becoming like electric. So what is your take on AI? And do you think that, it'll replace possibly, artists, possibly? Or what's your take on that?
I mean, it's interesting because I first saw an AI artwork about 2 or 3 weeks ago. So
Hmm.
someone posted it on Facebook, and I didn't know that we were at that level yet, where AI was making artwork at this point. I remember seeing there was a art exhibit
Hmm.
where people would sit down in front of a camera and there was a machine that was drawing people's portraits
Hmm.
just from the image, them sitting in front of the camera. It was a
Right.
machine drawing a portrait. And but with that I think it's the same one that you're talking about, where you give it a few Google words or a few words and it
Hmm.
comes up with an image. And
Right.
some of the images were really good.
Hmm.
What I saw, they were really striking. And
Right.
I I don't know what to think of it though for the future, because in one
Hmm.
aspect I love technology. I'm inspired by science and technology. I've always I've been inspired by the thought of AI, but also terrified about the thought of AI in the future.
Yeah, yeah.
Growing up with like Terminator and all of these types of movies about machines taking over,
Yeah, yeah,
you know,
right.
yeah. But when it comes to art and the art world, I don't know how I feel, because I feel like there have been a lot of things throughout history that have come up where people thought that this was the end of certain aspects of either art. When the camera first was invented, people thought, okay,
Right.
this is the end of portraits. You know, um, it's going to be interesting to see how this technology develops, how people um, respond to it, and you know whether or not it's able to. It's just going to be seeing what it can create. For me, it's too new. It's for me
Right.
to have a fully understandable opinion on it.
Mm.
It's definitely too new for me, but I am fascinated by it, and I want to see where it goes, because these things are going to happen.
Right.
This is part of the evolution of humans. These things are going to be created. They're going to happen, and as
Mhm.
artists, we're going to have to do whatever we have to do to try to either stay ahead of it, just do our own thing, stay in our own lane, and we'll see how it develops. But
Mhm.
I definitely don't think it's anything that artists should, be afraid of in any way.
Right. Yeah, I can agree with that because I think, AI can never replace human creativity. You know,
Yeah,
as much as, with the machines and what they're doing, and it may make life easier, but at the same time, it's not going to replace human creativity. That's where the authenticity comes in, and that's what AI doesn't have.
exactly. Yeah, yeah. And I feel strongly about that. That's it's. I feel that there's going to come a point where they're going to try to put that in the machines.
Right.
That's somewhere down the line.
Hmm.
But at that time, whether or not, maybe artists at that time will have to just dig deeper, find ways to dig deeper.
Right.
And I think we have that ability to. I personally feel optimistic about the ability for artists to dig deeper and find those images that will always resonate as authentic human experiences.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Now, how would you describe in terms of like what would you want the takeaway to be when someone looks at your work? Like, what do you want the takeaway to be?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Um, I feel like I want people to see. I want people to see images of Black and Brown people in non-traditional ways, in ways that are outside of the norms,
Hmm.
sort of expanding beyond the boundaries of what of the way we've seen ourselves depicted in the past, and realize that you don't have to follow any traditional route.
Right.
That you can tell your story in your own way, in your own vision, and still have it be relevant.
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, that's I think mainly what I want people to take away from it.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, most definitely. Now, in your perspective, how would you define success?
Yeah, that's a hard one, because I think it's so personal to each person.
Mm.
um a lot of people define success with money. A lot of people define success with just feeling content with their work, or getting to a place where they
Mm.
finally feel content with their work. um for me, it's a mix of quite a few things. It's feeling content with my work. um I would say overall, so definitely finance is in there. I want to be able to financially live comfortably off
Right.
of my work. I want to get to a place where I feel good about my work.
Hmm.
But for the the overarching thing of my entire artistic life that I've always been guided by is just going deeper into the place where the visions come from.
Hmm.
And getting to that place, I think, can bring all of the outer elements of success that we want, or that I want.
Hmm.
And so I feel that the deeper I can go into those places, the more successful my business and my art is.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
I
absolutely.
think success is something that each artist decides for themselves.
Yeah, right, exactly. And then speaking of like with art, the thing is, what I find very interesting, like success is not also, having your own unique style and being in your own lane, but it's also being equipped for the business of art. And I think that's something that art schools could do more of, is helping us prepare in terms of the business aspect, because they don't teach you a lot of how to sustain yourself or understand different aspects of finances and pricing to a depth of where you're equipped for the real world, for the art world.
Yeah, and I've heard that. I didn't go to art school myself, but
Hmm.
from friends that I know that went to art school, that's one of the number one things that they say, that it didn't prepare them
Hmm.
for life, or the art life,
Hmm.
and yeah, I think that's really important, because I mean, it's not easy.
Hmm.
There's a lot that you end up having to learn through trial and error.
Hmm.
That I think, yeah, if there were those programs in school, it would have made it a lot easier for artists to understand what they're getting into going
Hmm.
forward in the art business, in the art industry.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I went to art school myself. I went to Savannah College of Art and Design, which is a really great school. It's one of the top schools, but I kind of wish they did more in terms of understanding, like, let's teach more about business and pricing, so that way, people are more prepared for the art business.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, yeah, that's I find that to be, something that's very, very important. But I definitely want to ask, like, how do you balance being an artist and just like everyday life? How do you find that balance?
Well, it's something, I mean, I'm still trying to figure it out,
Mm-hmm.
honestly. It's sort of an interesting thing, because when I left my job
Mm-hmm.
5 years ago, one of the things I didn't anticipate in going into doing art full time was the isolation.
Mm-hmm.
And this is something that I hear a lot of artists talk about, and it just comes with the territory.
Right.
We work, alone a lot of the time. And
Mm-hmm.
I've tried to, yeah, just really try to strike that balance between um, working on my own, dealing with isolation, but trying to see friends whenever the opportunity comes up. But over the years, I know that I tended to lean more towards focusing on the art and less on socializing.
Right.
And I don't think that that in the end is good, because I heard it described one time. I forgot the artist who said this, but he said, that creating art is it's breathing out.
Right.
And yeah, and what he meant by that was that, when you create art, you're breathing out, you're
Mm-hmm.
expressing yourself and things like that. And when you're around people and your community, that's, or nature, that's when you're breathing in. And so you need both of
Mm-hmm.
those things. You need to breathe in, and breathe out. And I've definitely, I have just this drive to constantly be in the studio, and this love and inspiration to constantly be in the studio. And sometimes I have to
Right.
tear myself away and make sure that I'm making time for my community, my friends, my family, and being
Mm-hmm.
out in nature. um,
Mm-hmm.
but it can be hard to strike that balance, and I'm still trying to learn how to do it correctly.
Mm. Yeah, especially also too, like, speaking about, especially within, my generation, we live in an age of social media. And I think sometimes we have to find the balance between, being on social media and, the real world, because that's very, very important to have that balance. And, the thing is with
Yeah.
art too, sometimes some people who are my age, will look at other people's artwork, say, oh wow, look at their work and look at mine. It's like, well, you can't compare yourself to other people. You don't want to get so hooked on social media to where you lose yourself a part of who you are, especially as an artist.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's really important, because social media, it's now part of the landscape. It's here. It's a thing. It's not going anywhere. And
Right.
I think, I know for myself. I mean, first of all, I have issues with social media as far as addiction. I'm just on it way too much.
Right,
Um,
exactly. Me too.
and I have this excuse from, like, oh, I just want to see other artists' art, but you just start getting into all this other stuff. But there's definitely issues. I think, I think back to for me growing up, and there was no social media, there was, no internet, things like that. And you would create art, and, you know, most of the world would never see it. Maybe a friend or two, or your family might see it,
Hmm.
things like that. And so I think that we've gotten to a place now with the internet and social media to where we feel that anything we create or anything we do or anything we get into, it has to be at a level that we're able to share it on social media, and it
Hmm.
has to be amazing, it has to be this and that. I kind of miss the days when we used to just do hobbies for hobbies that maybe we
Right.
weren't so good at, but we were just experimenting, things like that. And when it comes to art, I think it can be, it's interesting because I don't know what it's like to be an artist growing up in the age of social media, to where everything
Hmm.
you create, you're immediately comparing it to thousands and thousands of other artists online.
Hmm.
When I was growing up and creating art, it was just between me and my friends. We would kind of
Right.
encourage each other. Sometimes we'd battle, things like that. But um, I think it can definitely be detrimental. I absolutely find myself, sometimes unconsciously just comparing myself with other artists out there, now. And yeah, I think at some point in schools there are going to have to be social media classes
Hmm.
that help to teach us, how to operate in these technologies without internalizing a lot of things, that we see on there. Because yeah, when it comes to art, it can be harsh sometimes for artists, and just trying to get seen on there, trying to, people are scrolling, and you have to have something that causes them to stop scrolling, and,
Hmm.
and I feel like there's a lot of pressure in that. There's also pressure to keep posting.
Right.
There's some artists that'll tell you, oh, you got to post something every day,
Hmm.
and that's not something that I subscribe to. I feel like I post when I have something I feel is worthy of posting, and I don't feel like that's an everyday thing for me. But I feel like that's a certain pressure that artists are under too. Is this feeling that we have to constantly post and constantly keep, talking about what we're doing every day, and all the behind the scenes, things like that. So some things work for some artists and some things not for others.
Yeah, right. I could definitely agree with that. Last but not least, where could people find you on social media and how could people support you and your work?
Um, so on social media, I have a Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Instagram is at paullewinart.com,
Hmm.
or just at paullewinart for
Hmm.
Instagram. Twitter is at paullewinart. My website is paullewinart.com. Um, as far as supporting the work, just sharing the work, comments, likes. I have an online store with prints and originals that I sell to,
Hmm.
and that's connected to my website. So yeah, all of that.
Hmm. Well, thank you so much, Paul, for jumping onto the show. Yeah, I talk about you like to some of my guests, and when I when I interview them, like your work is absolutely great. I just love like the colors. I love the black representation, the futurism that you have with a shot of abstract in it. So your work is absolutely phenomenal. Thank you so much. I had fun.
Thank you so much. I'm honored that you were interested in interviewing me for this, reaching out to me, and yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, you're most welcome. Take care.
You too.
Bye bye.
Bye.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for watching. Please like, comment, share, and subscribe to the channel. Be sure to click the bell for notifications. Also, follow me on my social media platforms and visit my website, asiaticbird.com, and be on the lookout for more interviews to come very soon. Take care and stay beautiful.